This podcast is brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. Funny Bone Broth sources bones locally from a farm just north of Toronto. They use organic vegetables, quality ingredients, and small batch production. It's low in fat, low in sodium, high in protein, and high in delicious flavor. Check them out at funnybonebroth.com.
In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast. My name is Ben Grant. I'm joined today by JB. How's it going?
It's going well.
So the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are Grey Cup champions. The Hamilton Tiger Cats are not. How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel glad that I was not a Hamilton Tiger Cat supporter.
No kidding. Like, just imagining, well, we know a few Hamilton Tiger Cats fans, and some of whom didn't make it into work today.
No, I mean, it was the very definition of falling flat. They just came out. They didn't really look like they had a plan. They didn't really look like they knew what to do with Winnipeg's strategy. And they looked like somebody got punched in the mouth and never recovered.
Yeah, they had that deer in the headlights look like well into the third quarter. Actually, honestly, even on that last couple drives of the game, they had that look. They were stunned. I think they fully expected to come into that game, play the way they'd been playing all season long, and have that be enough. And I don't know if they were relieved maybe at playing the Blue Bombers, but they clearly looked like a team that had underestimated their opponent.
Yeah, they didn't have any electricity. It was out west. They looked surprised that it was such a Winnipeg friendly crowd.
Which shouldn't come as a great shock.
They weren't ready for Harris.
Or the Winnipeg offensive line. Like, I felt like Harris had a great game, but I felt like the Winnipeg offensive line was the difference in that game. They were opening up massive holes. They were getting to the next level, and Harris wasn't getting touched for a few yards. Now, he played a great game anyway, but man, they were dominant up front for Winnipeg.
Yeah. I don't see how you can do anything other than lay it at the coach's feet. When a team comes out that flat, that's on the coaching. And I think that they have to carry that. And even last year, how many times have we watched Grey Cups where an underdog defeated the seemingly undefeatable?
It happens a lot. Most of the Argos Grey Cups have been, Argonaut teams coming from nowhere.
Yeah, look at last year. Look at Ottawa.
Yeah.
And how Hamilton thought that they weren't ripe for a team coming in that nobody believes in, who went out there and punched them in the nose, I think is just a real failure. And I think that it's going to be really hard for those guys to climb that mountain again and to try and get back there, because they lucked out. They had Winnipeg in the final.
I think Steinhauer was surprised that his guys showed up flat. Like, he looked so angry during the game at the lack of intensity that his guys were bringing. He looked beside himself. Like, he wanted to get back out there on the field himself and make some of those tackles that his guys just weren't making. Make some of those plays.
Yeah, that can happen. I think anybody who's coached knows sometimes you can try and prepare a team, and if a team in their heart feels like they're the better team, then they go into that game expecting to dominate. And he just wasn't able to light a fire under them, which, really surprised me. It really surprised me that they weren't able to make any adjustments in the second half and at least make a game of it. They were never in the game.
No, it wasn't close. There was no part of the game that was close. from the opening snap. They looked lost and shocked, and like they wished they weren't playing football.
Yeah, I'm just as happy to have an Argo season where we lose to everybody but Ottawa than to cheer my team on and then watch them get taken to the woodshed.
I don't know if I'll go that far. Like, obviously losing painfully in the Grey Cup isn't great, but only beating Ottawa all season and one game over Winnipeg is also not great. And that's the funny thing too. Like, that's the one Winnipeg's the one team we beat this year that wasn't Ottawa, and they're the Grey Cup champs with our quarterback.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to exactly what we talked about, which is one of the beauties of this league is you don't need a 10-year rebuild.
Right.
You can, get this thing going and be back in it right away next year. I mean, Winnipeg only won 11 games.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and they had, obviously, I think.
Now they have our coach.
Yes, we need to get O'Shea, and I think this actually is helpful in that regard. Although the problem for it, and we're not going to turn this into a coaching podcast here, but I think him winning the Grey Cup completes something in Winnipeg, and maybe you can now say he can feel okay about moving on, like he's not abandoning the city, because I think he loves it there. I think he really likes Winnipeg, and I think he feels very attached to the city. And I think if pinball is going to try and lure him away, this is a much easier task, him having won, than him having the feeling like he still has to accomplish something.
There's no doubt that the anti-MLSE rule that they brought in to prevent teams from spending on coaches was brought in specifically for this exact situation, which is Toronto could outspend Winnipeg if they were allowed to. But that coaching cap, I think, essentially makes it impossible to have two coaches being paid at the same time.
But I think this part of the rule, I think, has kind of backfired on them. I don't think I do think they made the rule with that in mind. But I don't think they want teams hanging on to coaches that they don't want. I don't think that's something they thought through very well. I don't feel like the league wants teams like angry that they've got this head coach that they're paying.
Right. I mean, they have to come up with some sort of cap relief, because if you fire a coach and you've got that dead money, then you can't fire the coach.
And because I'm actually fine with the ops cap, but I think if you fire the coach, you still have to pay them, but that money shouldn't go towards the cap anymore. So I think in this situation, the Argos should be able to fire Chamberlain, still pay him the year he's owed, but have that money as like not count against the 2020 cap, which would allow them to bring in a new coach. But they may be stuck now where they can't because of the money that they owe Chamberlain and his staff, for that matter, right? Like these, I don't know what the contract situation is for every single member of the staff or what they're being paid, but I imagine we're probably pretty close to the top end of the ops cap.
Well, when Naylor had the announcement or the rumor, the insider knowledge that the Argos were looking to bring back the head coach but replace all the assistants, that just seems to me to be a money move, that you want to fire your head coach, but you can't. So you're going to do the next best thing, which is to bring in a whole new coaching staff, which almost never works. And you get a Mike Babcock situation where all the assistant coaches are not his coach. They all know that he should be gone. The players all know that he should be gone. And then 6 games into the season, having wasted the beginning at 1-5, you make a coaching change.
People are going to go crazy if that's what happens. And I think we're very close to that being a real possibility. But maybe they just put this out as a feeler. Maybe this is leaked to sort of see what the response is like. Is this going to crush our season ticket base? Is this going to really upset people? Where does the public stand on this matter? Maybe that's what this was. I don't know, but I'm nervous.
Well, Hugh Jackson got to come back for the Cleveland Browns with an all-new coaching staff.
That worked really well.
Really, really well.
Was that the 1 in 15?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we've done that. So, hopefully, I don't know. We'll move on to some of the stuff that we plan on talking about today. But that's obviously in the backs of everyone's mind, every Argos fan's mind. And it probably will be until we get a final word on the matter. And who knows when that's going to come. I really thought we would know by now what was happening. I really thought they would have relieved Chamberlain at this point, but obviously not.
I would bet that they're waiting for a definite no
from O'Shea.
Yeah, that they've back channeled and they don't want tampering. And
I'm okay with that because that means at least they're thinking about it. Like what I don't want is them to have already made up their mind that we've got no choice. We're bringing back Chamberlain because we have no option. I would feel better about it if they were looking at it and decided that they like Chamberlain and want to bring him back. I don't agree with that move, but I would respect that more than, man, our hands are kind of tied here. I guess we'll just have to make it look like we're shuffling the deck, but we're not actually doing anything. All right, let's talk about our defense. We did our offensive analysis last week, and hopefully you had a chance to listen to that. But we'll talk about the defense and players that we would like to bring back, players that we'd like to see return, and maybe some positional changes, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so where do we want to start here?
Well, I think probably linebacker. I think that we both agree that that's an area that needs upgrading. Our current crew was not great at blitzing, not great at pass defense, and not great at run defense.
And some would say those are important elements to a linebacker's repertoire.
Yeah, I mean, it was a problem. You could tell immediately that there was, we just couldn't control the middle of the field at all, and teams were able to get first downs at will.
And I think some of that is on the coaching staff. I feel like there was a lack of creativity with regards to blitzing. I felt like there was, I also felt like players were being used sort of awkwardly. Now, we were very injured, and that group, more than any other group, suffered, some pretty catastrophic injuries. There were so many different linebackers. Like if you look back through, and having done this over the last few days, looking back at some of the starting lineups that we put out there from week 1 all the way through week 17, it was like a continually rotating group of 3 linebackers that we walked out there. Sometimes we had DBs playing linebacker. A lot of the time we had D linemen playing backer, and I think that was among some of the issues that we had. So it's not all on the players, but yeah, when I look at guys that I want to bring back, it's not as long a list as, for example, the defensive backs.
Yeah, I think that there's a reason why Winnipeg and Hamilton were able to be so successful and to get into the Grey Cup. And when you watch the Grey Cup and the 2 playoff games that got them there, it just jumps off the screen.
The speed you're talking about.
The speed of their linebackers, their ability to cover running backs out in coverage, their ability to hold up against the run. Those are really missing, so we need to add speed to our linebacking core.
And I think that a way we can do that without having to necessarily bring in, nothing against bringing in new people. I think that's a must. But we've got a ton of very talented defensive backs, some of whom, and I know we saw like Quidarius Ford play a little bit of linebacker. I'm not sure, I'm not 100% that he's the guy, but there are a few DBs that I think I would be interested in seeing playing Sam. And I wouldn't even, I don't even mind having DBs playing Sam and Will, and just sort of have one true linebacker at the MAC. And for me, that was awe. Like I thought Mika Awe was, he was a guy that was a presence out there. He's not huge by any means, 6 feet 225, but he's a guy that I actually liked at the beginning of the season. And then unfortunately, like everybody on our linebacking core, he got hurt, and then we never saw him again. But I would love to see him given another shot at middle. And I think one of the problems that we had was because of the injuries, there were so many defensive linemen that came in. Like I love Toby Antigua. I think he's a great player. I'd love to see him back, but probably not as a linebacker. I just think that that's a position where if we're going to bring in people from different positional groups, it should be from the defensive back side as opposed to from the defensive line side.
Yeah, I mean, you can have third down conversions be a package that you have if you're really worried about being able to bang when you're trying to get 1 yard in terms of linebacker size. But the majority of the game is going to be spent in coverage, being able to fly around the field. The need for linebackers over 220 pounds in the CFL is just not there. It just is not how they should be designing this team. Like the amount of inside run there is in a given game, it's not going to make the difference, in my opinion.
I agree. And if a team is able to march it up and down the field on you in 3-down football, then you tip your hat to them. But I think if you can defend the pass and force them to do nothing but run, I think you're going to win most of those football games. Because all it takes is one holding call, and that's the end of the drive, if you can defend the pass well.
Yeah, exactly. I think that they have to have somebody who can get home on a blitz.
And that's a speed thing too, though. Like you see some of these guys, some of these 240-pound linebackers, which that used to be the way. It wasn't unusual to see 240, 250 in your linebackers, but that's just not how the game's played anymore, especially in the CFL. And so, getting a guy with a motor who weighs 215, 220 is a guy that's going to be able to get there on a blitz. A guy that's going to be able to play some coverage. And these are a lot of these guys were safeties in college, and I think that's the perfect fit for your CFL linebacker. So yeah, I'd like to see Awe come back. I'd love to bring our Canadian guys back too. I know they didn't get a ton of starting time, but I thought they were really good contributors in special teams. And when they did get on the field, talking about like Quimo and Onyeka, those guys certainly weren't out of place, and they were contributors. And that adds to our Canadian count, which is obviously an important number to consider. And then maybe you can look south to fill in some of those other spots, or maybe just look to the group of defensive backs that we've got there, and take a look at which one of them can fill in as a Sam or Will.
Yeah, I mean, the defensive line is definitely an area that I thought we had decent talent at. I mean, Lang obviously is a great player.
He's awesome.
I thought defensive line, I didn't feel watching the Argos this year that they were getting bullied at the line.
No, that wasn't the problem. Like our run defense wasn't great, but it wasn't the defensive line. And the same thing with the pass rush. The line was doing their job for the most part. It wasn't perfect, but it was more the other groups that were letting the defensive line down. But if you had a healthy like we picked up Coleman for Lemon midseason, and like if Devon Coleman were able to stay healthy, that's a guy that would have looked awesome next to Lang. But we never really got to see much of that. But those two guys in the middle. We had a number of guys that can play on the outside, whether it's Antigua or Bishop the Third, or any of those guys that can come around the edge. Actually, Justin Thomas, I thought, looked really good, and he's got really good defensive end height. But we've got so many guys that can step in and be good defensive linemen that I don't really think that's an area we have to go out searching for. Hopefully, we can bring back Coleman and. Lang, he and Lang together, I think would be a pretty formidable pair on the inside.
I would make many changes, in truth, to the defense. I felt that they were really hung out to dry by the offense so often.
Their numbers weren't good. Like, you look at the amount of points allowed, and it wasn't good. And the, their numbers against the run weren't good. Their numbers against the pass weren't good. But like you're saying, a lot of it is just that deflated spirit of having to march out there again, knowing that you've got to make a stop or the game's over. And then we're early in the second quarter and we're down 3 scores already. And I think a lot of times it's just tough for the defense to pick themselves back up because they know that they're not going to get that support from the other side of the ball.
Yeah, the defense was fine. And of course, can it be improved? Yeah, you could potentially bring somebody in with a little more experience at linebacker, and maybe somebody with a little bit more pass rush skill set for the defensive line. But they're fine. Like, I don't see it as the central problem. I think that if you have an offense that can put together some drives and can give you decent field position, at least half the time, the defense is going to come out. I think you make an excellent point, is the psychological aspect of defense. Of if you're not elite, which they're not. If you're elite defense, then you take pride in carrying the team. But if you're just okay, you need help. And they didn't get any help. And so I think they're a 500 team defense, which is fine, as long as you have an offense that can, that can put up some points and is not constantly going 2 and out in the first quarter of every game.
I can see people taking issue. Like, I can actually feel people pounding on their steering wheels driving into work, saying, "How could you call this defense fine when they're last in the league in almost every category?" But yeah, I'm with you. I think the defense is fine. I think the numbers are a bit misleading. I think the personnel is the part that's fine. I think if you take away all of those games lost to injury, I think if you're not playing people all over the place, out of position, it's new guys every week. And defense it's something where you have to rely so much on communication. And I'm telling you, go back and you look at some of the depth charts for games 1 through 18, and it's crazy the number of different rotations we had throughout the season where you don't know who's playing next to you any given day. And how well can you communicate as a secondary or as a linebacking core when you look over and you're like, who the heck is that guy? Because it's just someone different every week. And so I think that plays into it as well. But I agree with you. I think just when we're talking about the players we have, I think the players are fine. I don't think we need to make the same number of changes that we may have suggested for some positional groups on offense, like the offensive line that we kind of tore apart.
It's a coach league. I mean, if you look at Winnipeg's roster, nobody's going to say, wow, look at that, generational group of talent. And they just went out and smacked the Ticats defensively. So from a defensive point of view, I feel like it's scheme first, and then belief second, and natural physical talent third. So if we're using our money and our resources, that's not where we need to make the fix in the CFL.
And this ties in nicely to maybe transitioning to the defensive backs, because that's where I feel like we have a ton of talent. I think there are a bunch of guys that were being used poorly this season from a coaching standpoint, and that's something that can be fixed. Because what we've got is a pretty undersized group of defensive backs, a lot of guys that are 5'9" and 5'10", 180 pounds. And the problem is those guys were getting beat in the system that we were playing, where the coverage was really good, but they were just getting bodied. They were getting boxed out. Some like that BC game near the end of the season was so frustrating because we got absolutely hammered. It was 55-0 until the last 10 seconds. But a lot of those, they weren't busts. They were guys that were right there in coverage, but they just sort of got outbodied or or outplayed for the ball. And I feel like you've got talent in that group. You've got to find a way to put them in positions to allow them to succeed. I think we need some more creativity in the zones that they're playing. I think we've got the speed to play man, but not necessarily across the board. And maybe we need to see some more combos, and that's something that would help out, because we just didn't have a ton of guys that are going to take out your big slot receivers, and that's where we got into trouble, playing man coverage against those guys, and just getting out jumped and boxed out. But like I want to go through a couple guys here that I thought were outstanding. So just in terms of late season, like Shaquille Richardson was added late. I loved him at corner. He had that pick six against Hamilton at the end of the year, but for him to come in and play against Montreal, having spent like 2 days in the system, well, maybe that tells you a couple things. But he was awesome, and I think he is such a pain in the butt to play against. You can just see the other receivers lining up against him; they don't want any part of him. And I love the attitude that he brings to that defense. I think Alden Darby brings some of that too. He's another guy that I know they experimented with him playing corner. I think he belongs at free safety, and you saw what a difference he could make at free safety, because when he wasn't out there, we were getting eaten alive.
Yeah, Darby needs to be the centerpiece of this defense.
Agreed.
They need to build the defense around Darby and funnel things to Darby and blitz with Darby and sit down in a room and think, I've got this weapon, how can I use it? And build things with that in mind. Because I think he's fantastic. I think that he is absolutely all-star quality. And he just is not being used as much as he needs to be. He needs to be they need to build up the middle. So whoever they get at Mike and with Darby at free safety, and then everything else can be fine after that.
I think too, like you've got like Jonathan Mincy, who was another guy that got hurt, and he's a pretty big guy. Like he's just about 200 pounds, but that's a guy that we were talking about earlier, putting DBs in linebacker spots. Like that's a guy I would love to see. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's hard for us to say because we haven't seen them on the field or at practice. But I'd love to see him take a shot at playing Sam or the Will spot, because he's got enough size, but he's quick. He can really pick that ball up in the air. He plays the ball like a receiver, and he's a sure tackler. He's just an aggressive football player. And I think we've got enough other guys. Like I would love to see a healthy Matt Boateng, and he's a Canadian, which again helps with regards to our ratio. So if you get Boateng with the speed that he's got playing corner on one side, Shaq Richardson playing corner on the other side, maybe Mincy becomes a backer. You got Darby playing free, and then we got a bunch of other guys that can play halfback just fine. Whether it's whether that's Fogg or Covington. Washington, Woodson, like they were all, those guys were all fine, and I think they would be better with the pieces we just mentioned, solidly schemed around them.
They need an identity. The whole team is just sort of generic blue shirt athletes. There's no personality. I mean, Wilder's great, but there's no personality to the team. There's no sense of this is what an Argonaut is, and I don't mean to always come back to that, but the defense, what are they? Are they fast? Are they strong? Are they scheme, complex? Are they simple scheme but fast and vicious in their execution of it? Are they a pass defense? Are they a run defense? They're not really anything. And they need to pick something, because being nothing gives you what we saw this year, is that they need to pick an identity. We're the team that stops to pass, or we're the team that stops to run, or we're the team that blitzes the heck out of you. That was missing from the team. It wasn't really anything. It's like we're the team that plays vanilla exhibition defense that you can score a lot of points on. That was the identity of the team.
And I think based on the players we have, I think if you've got Shaq Richardson and Alden Darby back, I think you can build around those guys and look for your attitude in them. Because those are guys that you just don't want to play against for a variety of reasons. But those are, and maybe the identity we're looking for can be, we are the team that you played last night because you can't get out of bed this morning. And I think we've got a few characters like that on defense that if you kind of let them run with it, have that sort of aggressive mindset and punishing style of defense. And they'll take chances, they'll gamble, they'll ball hawk, and they'll deliver a hit when they're set up to. And I think we've got a bunch of guys like that, but unfortunately, almost all of them are defensive backs. And so that needs to obviously extend to the defensive line and the linebacking core in order to make that your defensive identity.
But it's not an emergency on defense, and I know...
The identity part?
No, just the skill-wise. Identity, that's all on the coach. That's all going to be, on who they bring in. And are we going to be having this same conversation next year? Or are we building towards something? And you'll know immediately whether the coach that was hired or the coaching staff is building towards something, or if we're just treading water. I mean, so that's what it comes down to. It's a coach's league, and they've got to try and find somebody who can build a philosophy, and a philosophy that we can have for 5 years. That's really the hope, that they're able to go out there and even if they lose, at least to lose trying to do something instead of losing not doing anything.
And I'm okay with watching them lose if I feel like I just saw them go out and play football.
Yeah, exactly. Or if I felt like I felt like they tried some different things, in cover 2 shell, and then like on third down blitzing. I mean, geez, you watch it and you're like, it's so predictable. And you can be predictable if you have great athletes, or if you have better athletes than the other guy. But if you don't, then you got to be a little trickier than what they were.
The game that it really stood out to me the most was near the end of the season, that game against Montreal, in Montreal. A game that didn't matter to either team. Montreal was already locked into their spot. Toronto was already out. And Montreal ran so many creative blitzes and zone blitzes, disguised their coverage extremely well. And I think they were just sort of playing around, just trying to see, let's try some stuff out. Let's find some things that work. Let's put some stuff on film that other teams are now going to have to think twice about when they're preparing for us. And my question is, if Montreal is doing that in a game that means nothing to them as they're prepping for the playoffs, why weren't we doing any of that all season long? Like, we had an entire season, basically, after that disastrous start to see if we could, figure some stuff out going forward to try and, let's try this. Let's see how guys handle this responsibility. And I don't know if it's just, that turnover that we saw with regards to injuries, and that's the reason why. But I don't think that's a good enough explanation, and I don't think that can be an out for why we didn't see any of that defensive creativity. Because you go back and watch that game, and I watched that game again just the other day, and it blew my mind how much was going on for Montreal when they were on defense versus what we had going on when we were playing defense. And we're just talking about X's and O's here. Because I think man for man, I think our defense is better than Montreal's. I would rather have our defensive personnel than Montreal's defensive personnel. They've got a few guys that I would love, obviously, but I think the difference was in what they were doing.
I don't see any difference between us and Montreal. I think we're the same team. They got better quarterback play, and more.
I think we're more skilled. I think we're more skilled almost everywhere. Not everywhere, but almost everywhere.
We play. Yeah, we're right there. We're right there with Montreal. There's no reason we can't be Montreal next year. But I don't want to be Montreal next year if it's not building towards becoming something great.
Well, you said it earlier in that Montreal and Toronto were the same team going into that game in the Maritimes, and then after that, Toronto became, that sort of flat team that we saw, and Montreal went on to become a playoff team. But I think you're right in your initial assessment that they are basically, the same group of guys, but one team responded and seemed to play for something, and the other team folded.
Yeah, it would be great to see a defense come out next year that is crisp. And of course, you're always going to have a bust. But
I think it's almost more frustrating losing the way we were losing without busts. Like, we weren't losing because there were busts. We were losing because teams were just able to. They knew exactly what we were running. They see, there wasn't anything going on. The quarterback's looking pre-snap. He's thinking to himself, "Hey, this looks a little bit like cover 3 cut with no blitz coming." And he drops back and he's like, "Huh, it's cover 3 cut with no blitz. So here's my read. Boom, completed pass, first down."
Yeah, the lack of pass rush killed us because from a defensive point of view, from a defensive backfield point of view.
But it was a lack of deception. It was like, yes, there wasn't a pass rush there, but I'm okay if there's not a heavy pass rush if pre-snap the quarterback believes there's going to be. There's got to be something that plays with the head of the offensive coordinator and the quarterback. And if as a defense they're not even thinking about you, then I don't know what the point is. Like, you should be, as a quarterback and as an offensive coordinator, you should be stressed because you don't know what you're going to see on any given play. And even as that quarterback takes a snap, he should be nervous that he's going to look up after he catches that snap and not know for a second what's going on. And I don't feel we ever did that to any quarterback all season, except possibly Ottawa.
We did do a great job scheming up to beat one of the worst teams in the history of the CFL.
And I don't actually think that was a scheme thing. We played the same vanilla defense for those games, but
No,
but we had the personnel where it didn't even matter. Like, we were just playing a very vanilla defense, as was our style, but that was enough to beat Ottawa. But obviously that's not the goal.
No. New coach, new scheme, same players.
And I hate to come back to it. Maybe I don't hate to come back to it because I do like talking about it, but imagine just with some of these guys, like, how much their eyes will open if we can bring in O'Shea. You see with the Leafs, like, you saw some of that footage the other day with Maple Leafs players, footage from their first practice under Keefe, and their eyes were wide. They were excited. They were like so ready to get out there on the ice, and that was reflected in their first game, that first game against Arizona, where they were just flying all over the place because they were inspired by somebody new. And knowing the kind of individual that Mike O'Shea is, I can only imagine how some of these players that we've got are going to fly around the field and just embrace some of that defensive intensity and excitement that seems to follow around the teams that he coaches.
If we can't get O'Shea, which is likely, then I hope that MLSE... I mean, this is where you run into the problem, where if you get a spark plug, just absolute energetic DC comes in, is kicking butt, has them fired up, the initial question for the players is going to be, why is this guy not in charge? I don't know if you can have a head coach who can be confident enough to have, it's not like it's Bobby Bowden riding around in his golf cart and his defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator can run the team and then coach says, well, have a good one, boys. I'll see you on Saturday. I don't think that's going to work. I think that really prevents you from hiring the best possible defensive coordinator, because how is that going to not tip the balance where the defensive coordinator is so much more impactful than the head coach.
But I think maybe there can be a suggestion that this is going to happen, like a 2-year plan. So let's say we bring in somebody. Let's say we keep Chamberlain as head coach because we're sort of forced to with the ops cap, and we bring in a defensive coordinator with the understanding, and they know, and MLSE knows that, this is your ship next year. You're the defensive coordinator this year, and next year you're in charge. And everyone kind of knows that. Well, that's basically what happened with Sheldon Keefe. Like, everyone knew at some point but he was going to be the head coach.
But he never came up to be part of the staff. He said, I will not be an assistant.
Yeah, but we don't have a minor league affiliate, so what do? Like, just bring him in as an observer? That's even worse. Like, have him out there as the DC. Learn some of the players' names.
That's exactly the
But that's
problem.
fine. And yeah, it might be a bit of a mess next season, but maybe halfway through the season, whenever the numbers work out, you make that change, there's your guy, and everyone's like, finally, we're getting the guy that we wanted as the head coach. And I'm not saying this will turn into a perfect season next year. I don't think that's an ideal setup. But in working with what we're presented, maybe that's the solution.
No.
But what is then? So what do you do? What's your solution? If Chamberlain has to stay,
if he has to stay, then next year is a punt.
So then why not bring in that guy?
Because you can't bring him in that way. It's got to come in fresh. It's got to be somebody who comes in and starts the team from fresh as the head coach. Has no previous, because the interactions that he has with the team as head coach are different than he will have positionally. And it's a different aura that has to be around him. I just think it doesn't work to promote him from the sideline. Look, some guys are going to like, the head coach, and they're not going to want some guy to replace him. I just think you run into politics, you run into complications. Everything about it is ugly.
I think it's a bigger concern if he were coming in as a positional coach, because there you do tend to have tighter relationships than you do with an OC and a DC. I don't know. I feel like
I don't want to point out Hard Knocks to our NFL brethren to the south, but Hugh Jackson had 3 potential head coaches brought into his staff.
Yeah, but
and they all knew that they were potentially going to replace him, and he knew they were going to potentially replace him.
Everybody knew. And
the whole thing went sideways.
But that wasn't the problem in Cleveland. Like, they had other issues, and they continue to. Like, that didn't. It's not like everything was fixed after Hugh Jackson left. So, like, I don't know. I think that, and maybe that's the destiny of the Toronto Argonauts, because we've certainly seen season after season of being able to put it together sometimes.
To jump across sports again, you bring up Keefe and Dubas. That's what I want. And I will say that every time we're on this thing. What I want is Masai. What I want is Dubas. What I want is forward-thinking, progressive, analytic-based guys. That's what I want. That's what the Leafs have done. And they got rid of Mr. Hockey Babcock. And that's what TFC did. And that's what the Raptors did. And the path is clear that if you hire some CFL guy, that's what you're going to get. You're just going to get another year of 500 and treading water, and you're not building towards anything. But if you go out and you find somebody who can challenge the status quo and can find the market inefficiencies for players that other teams aren't valuing, and have a philosophical idea of how you want to build your team, those teams were successfully turned because of that. I mean, you look at how bad the Raptors were, how bad the Leafs were. That's what turned them. What turned them was having somebody who said, this is the team we're going to build, and this is how we're going to build it. And that has to be a brand new guy. Like I've said, I want all security cards to get into the building, take them back right now. I hope that they're on the phone, telling them to come in for breakfast tomorrow. And when they come in, just take their key and then shove them out into the parking lot.
Right. So on that note, as we all want to jump out a window now. I think
not
that's
out a window, just shoved back into the parking lot.
no. I'm saying
cold,
I want to jump out a window.
Cold November rain.
It just
wash
doesn't
down
sound
my
very
face.
promising because I don't think it's going to happen.
No, I don't think it'll happen either.
Like it just makes me depressed. And you talk about a 500 season, like that sounds pretty good right now. A 500 season, like yeah.
That's loser talk.
Yeah, but look where we're coming from. Like a 500 season next year, I think I'd feel okay about the Argos going 500 next year. I think how can you not think that's an improvement from the disaster that was 2019? Like we're not gonna. There's no situation in which we end up with 15 wins next year.
No. No, I want 10 wins.
Well, that's only like 9 wins is a 500 season.
Well,
so
I want 10 wins.
Okay, well that's okay. I think that's doable. I think we get 11 if things go well and people stay healthy and we bring the right people in. But as you said, I think it's more likely that we're sitting here this time next year, lamenting about another 5 or 6 win season.
There's no debate that if you look at the teams who are successful, they are successful because they have a program that they follow year after year after year. And Calgary will be back in the Grey Cup next year, I'm sure. And if we want to become a Calgary, which is what I want, what I don't want is what we've had the last 10 years, which is feast and famine. If we want to become a Calgary, then...
When you say Calgary, you're talking about just sort of consistently good.
Consistently
good. A team
good.
that generally produces and sometimes is at the top, sometimes is 2-3, but
right.
A team that never goes out with, a 3 or 4 win season.
Right. They are consistently...
I think there are a few teams in the league like that. Like Saskatchewan generally runs that way as well. And yeah, actually, recently maybe that's not so much the case, but... I get what you're saying. Like to build a model where this is a long-term thing, and we are always going to be like this going forward. I think that is a harder thing to do in Toronto than it is in some other markets.
My desire is for more brains being used and less tackling dummies. I want. We're not dealing with the NFL. It's not a $100 million league or $1 billion league. There's no reason that we can't be on the cutting edge of research, of analytic study, of challenging, finding loopholes in the rules, finding the space in the rules to do things that other teams are not. And, just don't give me boring. I don't care if we lose, but to try and push the envelope, try and do things other teams are not, and stop punting the ball at the 50-yard line.
Well, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for listening, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We'll be back next week with some more exciting off-season action, and hopefully some decisions have been made now that the season is officially over for everybody. Hopefully the next time we're on the air, there's something to talk about where dominoes have fallen, and we know where we're going here.
See you next time.